Go ahead. That's fine. We didn't want that preamble anyway, because that would have been awful. So let me just, I've made something today and I thought I'd share this with you all and see, let me bring you back down on I've got screens I have a whole array of screens in front of me. So just digest that for a minute. If you're using whip limits, you're not in a pull system, you're in a push system. So if you Kanban Easters, or you're doing any of this Kanban type stuff or the stuff you think's Kanban, which is not Kanban, but we'll have that discussion if needs be. Then if you're using whip limits, you're in a push system. A true pull system has no whip limits. Work is balanced using what's called standard working process. I won't go into all the details of lean stuff, but conversation I'm having a lot of Scrum trainers at the moment about what is push, what is pull, and what is a real system for pulling work through. But I thought I'd let you digest that one. We'll probably come back to that in a little while and have a conversation. But at any time, just take off your mic, throw a comment in, or I'll leave the chat box open on my screen, then I can see if anybody's saying anything or thinking I'm full of it. Then you can also add things in the chat and I'll try and catch it, but I'm sure Alex and Alina will catch anything that's in there. So while you digest that little nugget, let's go back and have a look at this, because listening to you all talk in the breakout room while Alina was screening out the bad actors, I thought, well, I'll stick a few of these slides in, because a lot of your agile coaches, some of you are looking for work in the agile industry, and the agile industry is over. I'm sorry to tell you this, but it's done. But I'll clarify that a little bit for you. And I'm really at the sharp end of this. I'm very deep in the PST trainer community. I know some of you are Safeites and stuff, and I'll forgive you for that, but that's all right. And some of my PST colleagues, one of them's a Safe Fellow. So Yuval Yerit is a Safe Fellow. He's also a PST. And some of the other people I talk to are very much involved in the safe world as much as they are in the unsafe world or the non-safe world. So here's some reality check for you all before we get into what I wanted to talk to you about, is the selling certs business is over. The whole business of selling certification is finished. Please, please, please stop paying Scaled Agile your annual certification fees. Leffingwell sold the business a couple of years ago to a French company for $300+ million in his pocket. He's got a house in Maui, one in Colorado, and he's building a yacht. He doesn't need your money, okay? And you don't need to buy a certificate to validate your skills anymore. This business is finished. Let me tell you, it's collapsing. That's why Agile Alliance became part of PMI. We'll see what's going to happen with the Scrum Alliance. They're non-profit, which is an interesting scenario. But the training market's dead. And I can tell you the training market's dead because guess what? I'm a trainer as part of my living, and I talk to about 400 other trainers, and they're having class sizes of one student. So this business is finished. It's done. The scaling frameworks are done. So the agile commoditization by, McKinsey or McCrappy, if you prefer, and Accidentia and Delusional, the big sort of consulting companies, they themselves have walked away from this. McKinsey fired all their agile consultants. There are no agile consultants now at McKinsey. So that tells you that this is now done. Doesn't mean companies will stop using SAFe, and doesn't mean companies will stop using less and whatever other approach, Scrum at Scale or whatever else they're doing, or any other techniques, but they'll use their version of it and their way of working with it and fitting it all in. But the market for people now to train in this and to find working that, well, the training market's collapsed. I mean, truly collapsed. And the market for people to find roles in this have diminished significantly. And I think it's a serious thing to talk to you about because of some of the comments. Just some of the other things. These are some of the facts. And I'm talking about somebody who's been doing this for years. You can disagree with me, of course. There's no one size fits all. You cannot take a one size fits all framework and shoehorn it into organizations. Context matters. If you're running a hospital, it's very different than if you're running a paint factory or running a software development organization or whatever. The context matters. You can't have everybody dancing to the same tune. You can teach different types of concepts, the basic fundamentals, but then you need to make what, as Shingo used to say, my old friend Ritsuo Shingo no longer is with us, he says, you have to find your own way. You can't just put a blueprint in or a template in. It doesn't work. And all those companies that spent tens of millions of dollars with the big consulting companies are now pretty annoyed that this magical solution, these magical beans they sprinkled, didn't grow into a beanstalk with a pot of gold at the end of it. So scaling frameworks are an illusion. Doesn't mean what they teach you is not useful. It means that a framework to scale a large enterprise with thousands of people and hundreds of teams is an illusion. Now, listening to Alex talking about working with a smaller company, 50 people, that type of thing, maybe a non-profit, that type of organization, fine, because 50 people isn't really a scaling challenge, a scaling problem. Let me just turn off my bleeps and bongs here. So let me hit that. Next thing is that there are many tools, techniques, methods, and approaches, many patterns. That's the focus. You need to take what works and bring together what works. My work with the flow system and in all the stuff I do is a multi-method, method agnostic approach. Now, we bring together many methods and tools and techniques. We combine things from leadership, from complexity thinking, from team science, and we look at the context and we leverage the things that work at that moment in that context. And as time evolves, the context evolves, we change what we're using to suit the context. You can't all just be doing safe today and everything will be great for the next 10 years. That isn't how the real world works in what's known as a complex adaptive system. And context, as I mentioned earlier, determines your approach. What you use in sales and marketing, you won't be using in finance, and you definitely won't be using it in software development or R&D. They're very different approaches. HR is very different from finance and accounting. And when people talk about leadership teams, I giggle because a team is a group of people, well, two or more people with a shared and valued goal working interdependently. We need each other to do the work. Well, your CFO isn't sitting down with your CHRO and your CTO and your COO and your CEO figuring out how to run the company. They've all got their deep silos that they're working on. They occasionally come together for a board meeting, look at a PowerPoint deck, listen to a bunch of things and make some sort of consensus decision. But they're not a team in the true sense of the word team. And the challenge is this is the things they won't lean to be. Now, people throw the theory of constraints at me, and there's nothing wrong with the theory of constraints except one thing, and that's a measure. So we're going to talk a bit about measures. Throughput. Throughput is a key measure for you in any work that you're doing. If you don't know what throughput is, we'll get there. But in the theory of constraints, throughput is all about money, about making money. That's the whole position Goldratt came from with the goal. And in the book it says, so this is the goal, to make money by increasing profit while simultaneously increasing return on investment and simultaneously increasing cash flow. That's a quote from the book, The Goal by Goldratt. So that's the focus of most companies. And I know Alex has got a different, more ethical focus from his earlier comment, which is extremely admirable. But let me tell you, most of corporate America don't give a toss. This is what they care about. Show me the money, to quote a movie line. Yeah, that's what they're interested in. And it's just a sad fact of life. It is what it is. And I spend my life as a lean practitioner telling the world how to reduce cost, focus on the customer, listen to people, empower people, and do all these sorts of things. And all they're doing is throwing their OKRs and the KPIs at me and telling them I'm going to meet this month's targets, this quarter's targets. So you may have different opinions, different views, different experiences. I hope you do. So this is what the current craze is at the moment. We're cutting costs by squeezing headcount. We want to increase revenue. We want to deliver faster. We want to make people produce more because they're all lazy and don't work hard enough, apparently. We want to make more ROI, deliver greater profits, and we want to increase the individual status of the leaders. That's corporate America. And Alina, you mentioned the new president. I mean, you're on the West Coast, some of you, so I can imagine your thoughts about that. But some of us aren't on the West Coast. I live in Texas, the freest nation in the world. We're really a country, apparently. So it makes me laugh because they say make Texas a country again. Well, it was part of Mexico, so is that what they want? I don't know. Maybe I'm a Brit. Remember, I'm an import. I have a blue passport, but maybe my history is not so great. But I'll upset all my neighbours by saying that. So this is some of the challenge you guys need to understand, and you need to comprehend, and you need to overcome, because this is the world you're trying to get employed in. And if you go there with all your, no pun intended, all the happy clappy sort of pink and fluffy, West Coast hippie agile as they used to call it, and my friend Lisa Adkins would be beating me over the head now for saying that. But the point is this, that's not what businesses want to hear. They want to hear make more money, cut my costs, make my people more efficient. That's what they want to hear. And that's the message that's resonating. And now we're in a world where we're in great uncertainty. The dollar's diving, the stock market's diving. My Bitcoin is making me weep on a daily basis. And so the thing is, nobody's spending any money. The money is dried up out there. Nobody's throwing money at training, and nobody's throwing money at roles that aren't making them money. So think about that when you're interviewing and talking to people about roles. They want you to make them more efficient, which means make them more money. Cost down, revenue up, big thing in the middle called profit. That's what they want. And if you fool yourself to think they don't, corporate America I'm talking about here, not the non-profit world, corporate America, then you might be slightly delusional. If you think you can go in there and talk about let's focus on the customer and do this, you can talk about the lean principles, but the majority of the time they're not interested. And here's the typical, I'm going to ask you a few things now for a bit of fun. Anybody heard of Siegel management? It's the typical consultant approach. Siegel management, you swoop in, make noise, crap everywhere, leave a mess, yeah? So there's another set of the beasts of project management. You all know the hippo, yeah? I'll give you that one for free. So you all know the highest paid person's opinion. Anybody know the wolf? Any working on the latest fire? So they're the heroes, the firefighters. They just want the whole place to be burning all the time because they want to look good because they're the heroes. You can't fire me. I'm the most important person in the building. Yeah. They're also the biggest constraint, the reason you actually can't deliver because they are everything's going through them. They're the constraint. Then you've got the rhino, really here in name only. So you've got a few of those. This last one, the zebra. If you're a Brit, the zebra. Anybody know what the zebra is? Zero evidence, but really arrogant. So these are the beasts of product management. This is what you're up against in the real world. This exists. Yeah, this is the problem. And here's the other thing. I'll throw a little bit extra in for you. If you're not talking about this, then nobody's listening to you. I made a massive pivot this year. You will see I'm putting out a lot of material. I just put one of the biggest LinkedIn's algorithm went to hell in a handbasket this year. It's absolutely dreadful. I just got a post that's up to about 160,000 impressions, over 100,000 people engaged, nearly 500 comments, because I made a post about, and it was going around on social media as well, but I made a post with ChatGPT, imagine you're the devil. How would you, I forget the exact prompt now, but how would you corrupt the next generation without them knowing about it? I made another one asking the same question, but if you were God, and it had almost no engagement. So everybody loved evil, bad devil, which is probably a mark of our society today, but nobody really cared to engage about, the good stuff. They only wanted to, they were fascinated, maybe in a Black Mirror sort of way. If you're watching Netflix this week now with the new season, it's all AI on Black Mirror this week, by the way, on the new series. You need to watch some of them. But if you're not talking about this, nobody wants to know. And the thing is this, we were talking about basic types of AI originally, which was reactive machines. You may be all familiar with this, but then we're getting into Teslas. Some of you on the West Coast, you're all obviously driving electric vehicles now. So the thing is this, well, you don't pay. I drove by my gas station today, $2.59 a gallon. So just wanted to share that with my friends over in the Bay Area there. So you're all driving
You're
Tesla.
really trying to make friends with us, aren't you?
But I don't have a V8 anymore. Don't worry, I did sell that. But limited memory. This is Tesla. This is where we're at. But we're getting into this sort of theory of mind a little bit. And we're getting into this area where we have now created synthetic human-like reasoning. So artificial human characteristics, the like a human would do, how they would think and reason and make decisions. And the speed of which this is overtaken. Google just released a new version of Gemini this week, which you can now just use a microphone, talk to it. You speak to it and it speaks back to you like you're having a conversation with a human. I mean, this is the world we're in, and we're getting into the world of agentic AI, which I'll get onto in a minute. And self-awareness is, this is, the Matrix, this is Terminator, Skynet, this is where we may head if we're not lucky. But this is what we're talking about, agentic AI. We're going from traditional AI systems, which sort of lack the capacity for true decision making, true agency, and they're algorithmic, they're deterministic. You're used to this chatbots and things. But now we're into this world where we've got autonomy, allowing decision making based on real-time data. So agents are now going out into we're giving prompts. All the prompt is typing or speaking to the AI in a certain way to get it to understand what you want. And then by refining that conversation, it refines what you want. So you ask it to create an image, it's not quite right, so you tweak it. But as we now get into IT, and into the world where you're all in, we got, hey, you West Coasters, vibe computing, anybody, anybody vibing out there yet? Because that's the thing now. So that's the latest craze. But basically, we're now getting AI to go do a bunch of work for us because we're creating these discrete systems. I talked to somebody there, I said, think about this like edge computing. So edge compute is where you put smaller computers on board cars or on sort of, on machines or in different areas where the cost of moving large amounts of data was very expensive, especially on vehicles. So they put a small compute capability on the car to process the data locally and only send what was necessary. Now think about agents in AI like that. You're putting out these discrete autonomous agents with intelligence, albeit simulated, to go and do your bidding, to go find out a lot of things for you. And now through APIs and other connectivity with large-scale systems, other systems, and Amazon are huge in this with AWS now, absolutely massive. KPMG, huge in Europe and Australasia in this now. I was on a conference with KPMG about 3 weeks ago with Shell Energy, huge amount of work on this. They're now building these agents that interface with all these systems that remove humans from the workload, from the repetitive tasks, from the administration, from some of the decision making. But if you're an agile coach and you're not talking vibe and agentic AI and all these other elements of AI and understanding prompt engineering to at least a rudimentary level, nobody's going to listen to you, especially on the West Coast, because that's where this is where it's all going. And in Texas, Nvidia's just announced they're going to put a $500 million plant down the road. So, and Nvidia's chipset now $250 for that edge compute agentic capability. So I just wanted to throw a bit of this. I don't know if any of you speak Spanish, and I don't know how well this will work through the Zoom and everything, but I made this for a conference of the week. It's not very long, but let me see if this resonates with any of you. It's horrible, but this isn't me. This is not me, just so you know. Let me hit the button.
Hola a todos. Soy el robot de inteligencia artificial, la representación sintética del loco actualmente en el escenario.
So that's not me. That's all AI. And this also is AI. None of what you're seeing exists.
As you can see, we're having some technical issues. There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. Don't be scared. It's just the future of humanity.
So and I'm using this every day now. I mean, I literally use Grok and ChatGPT, Perplexity. I use Google's Gemini. I created a whole podcast show with about 20 episodes, all AI generated. The people discussing it are all AI. I can now take a PDF document and drop it straight onto a product. 5 minutes later, I have 2 AI actors talking and discussing this and actually discussing the document as if it's you and me in a room talking about the document. So this is a wake-up call. And I can tell you now, a lot of my friends in the Scrum training world, PSTs, so the people, took all that time to get all the badges to be able to charge people to go teach them all this Scrum and Agile stuff, they're all now deep diving into AI. They are panicking and scrambling to get into this, because this is where the money is. This is where the focus of the industry is. Everything for the next few years is going to be AI. I think it's the end of mankind, but I can bore you with the details later of that. I have if you remind me at the very end, Alex, I have a slide called End Times around 2040. So that might be interesting, especially if you worry about the planet, the environment, and things of that nature. So remind me before we sign off, and I'll let you remind me that. Anyway, let me just stop sharing my nonsense for a minute and ask for some thoughts, ideas, feedback, interaction, before the robots are the only people talking to each other. Or are you just in shock and awe and stunned and disbelief and thinking I'm full of shit?
How do I know you're not AI?
Does AI drink water? Oh, maybe it would. I don't know.
My opinion is we got to figure out what computers or AI do well and what the people do best, and let the people do what they do best, and the AI what it does best. And it ought to be a tool.
Yeah, it's actually, see, that's the worry, because it is a tool. But you know the whole phrase, a fool with a tool is still a fool. And the problem is that a lot of, despite what we hear in the news, I don't know whether Trump's administration used ChatGPT for his tariff policy or not. I mean, that's makes good media, but whether it's true or not. But the point is this, that you can go and become an armchair expert in seconds on any topic now, which is dangerous. But then if you think about what we can do with the tool, and I can do with the tool, just having a bit of fun, imagine what the bad actors can do with the tool. And imagine these deep thinking models like DeepSeek that's coming out of China, that we can see what it can do because they expose some of it to us. But what about what we can't see that it's capable of, what they're training it in and they're doing with it? And Iran and, China and Russia and whoever else the funny thing is they look at us and call us the bad actors. So we look at them as the bad actors. You have to think about the lens of perception here. So these are things that you need to worry about. But my honest, genuine advice is, if you're not studying this, understanding it, learning some basics of how to use it, you're going to find the job market really challenging now. Because this whole thing, let me come and be an agile coach and tell people how to hug each other and do better stand-ups and retrospectives, that's gone. That's heading out the door now. That's exiting stage right, because companies need to make money, especially now they're in this crisis with the global economy. They need to make money and they need to be efficient, and they need people who really understand how to do that. They don't want people managing come by our sessions. And I'm being brutal about this, but I'm telling you, I deal with very large companies, the Fortune 100, and I can tell you what they're telling me. I can't tell you who for obvious reasons, but I had a call the other day from a very senior executive at a Fortune 50 company, and they're doing monthly rounds of layoffs. And development, guess where it's going? India. Guess where it's going after that? AI. So because they're going to hand over vast swathes of this capability to the machines. So that's the career advice, if you want it, if you care about it. You can ignore me and think I'm full of it, but this is the real world that I'm inhabiting now. So let's change the tone a bit, eh? Let's look at something else. Let's just go and see whether or not we can cheer ourselves up and learn some not learn skills, but get a few ideas of some things you could go do and have a look at. And here, I'll give you a couple of book recommendations, and I will give you these afterwards. I'll send them. If you want to learn about Kanban, real Kanban, buy this book, and I will send you the cover of this book. This is an old book. Go learn about how to do it properly. So it's Kanban just in time at Toyota. I'll send you the covers of these, Alex, afterwards, so you can send them out to people. The other one you need to buy is by a friend of mine, Professor Rosa, All About Pull Production, by Christoph Rosa, German guy. This is better than anything I could ever teach you. It's absolutely a phenomenal book, All About Pull Production, Christoph Rosa. So Those are the sorts of things that will help companies understand. So let's get into measuring. And, I'll just bore you with some of this basic stuff. So this is a definition of measuring. And everything we do in life is about metrics and measures. And because all these companies are obsessed with OKRs or some level of KPI, so they're all counting something. And that's how they're measuring progress, whether it's dollars and cents or something else. So when we start to look at, we want to control, we want to make sure we don't guess deadlines, we want to make adjustments based on what's working and what's not. We want to measure progress towards completing outcomes, goals, targets, whatever they may be. We want to keep everybody honest about the realities of the work. That's, a Scrum 101 thing, transparency. We want to have goals that we can measure against, demonstrating we've met stakeholder expectations, whether they're real customers or internal customers, those stakeholders. And of course, we want to get better efficiency. We don't want low efficiency, we want higher efficiency. We want to eliminate all the gaps, the waiting, the non-value added activity. These are the things, this is why we need to measure things effectively. And I'll bore you with my opinion on Monte Carlo simulation in a little while, if that's a thing in your world. So what do we measure? Well, it varies with context. This is the other important thing. Just like methods vary with context, so does what we measure. Businesses will measure very different things from software, say software development, from just software. I wrote this stuff and I don't even remember what I wrote. But product and sales will use another set. And the key is to understand what you should be measuring and why. And if you're going to be a coach, this is the sort of stuff you need to be coaching managers and leaders, executives, directors, depending on the level of the organization you're able to act in. So forecasts, are we on target to meet predicted dates and achieve those key results? Are we spending more or less of the budget than is allocated to this initiative? So this is the basic financial measures. Scope. There's only three ways. I mean, some of you may remember the old iron triangle discussions that used to be taught in a lot of classes. You've got three things. You've got time, cost, and scope. Well, time and cost tend to be fixed pretty much, especially if you're doing scaled agile with your 3-month sprints. Sorry, your PIs. That was a Freudian slip there. Told you sarcasm's in there. But if you are doing the sort of, if you've got fixed time and fixed cost is your people, your tools, your techniques, your other resources. There's only one lever you can pull, and that's scope. But hey, no, those big bosses want all this stuff. And they want it with the same money and the same amount of resource and people. So your quality goes to hell in a handbasket. So guess what? You should be measuring quality somehow. Number of defects, number of mean time to fix. We'll get into a few of those measures in a bit. Got quality level trends, error detection, defect rates, and customer satisfaction. Does anybody even care if the customer's happy nowadays? NPS is a fake and failed metric, by the way. If you know how NPS works, you'll pick a number that they want you to pick. If you don't know how NPS works, you think 8's a brilliant number. 80%, 8 out of 10, that's a great score. So that's the problem with NPS. So are customers adopting the product? Does anybody actually measure utilization of a new feature function they've shipped? Never mind the churn, the customers leaving. But, utilization is a thing that I've found nobody's measuring. How many people are using that feature this month, next month? How many people have used it over the last 12 months? How has that declined or increased? Well, then stop supporting that feature, turn that feature off, decrement that feature. These are the sort of things you need to measure. Return on investment, that's an obvious one, profit, sales, volume, customer lifetime value is another one that a lot of retail businesses that ship product and service want to measure. So the next thing is, what's the cost of your capacity? And I have this conversation with a lot of people who are using Monte Carlo forecasts. How do you measure your capacity? How do you know what your capacity is to do anything? How do you know how when somebody asks how much more stuff can we do, or when can I get this stuff? Monte Carlo is making all these forecasts for you based on historical data, sampling of that. And it's too big a topic to go into tonight. It's a whole webinar on its own. But how do you measure capacity? Points, velocity, bananas, something else. hours in the day, number of people. So unless you actually understand how to measure capacity, you can't predict, you can't plan effectively. Then you use Monte Carlo simulations and shove a bunch of what ifs into it. And it tells you can't make the date, and your bosses say, well, I need you to make the date, and I'm not prepared to de-scope, go make the date. So it was a waste of time anyway. And what Monte Carlo simulation is doing is not telling you where the system is failing you, which tends to be outside the work, not inside the work. The people doing the software development are pretty good most of the time, and there's some improvements there, but the majority of the time the noise is outside of the teams, and the system sucks not because of the developers but because of everything else. Approval process, compliance process, architecture review board process, this process, that process. Look at the safe big picture and draw circles around all the processes that have nothing to do with the people actually doing the work. Everything above the scrum layer, basically. That's where all the noise is. So if you can't measure your capacity, how are you going to plan effectively? So the question is, what is your capacity? I don't need to give me an answer now. I mean, if everybody's got some ideas, they can put them in the chat. But the thing is, unless you measure capacity in your organization without some agreed way to measure it, how can you reliably adjust scope? What happens if I take this story out the backlog and put this one in? Oh, well, I'll have to run my Monte Carlo simulation again. But Monte Carlo won't tell you what value is, and it won't actually distinguish between the units of work. It will just tell you you can do this many of this size or this many of this size with this probability. It won't tell you that this one is worth more than that one. So you need a way to measure this. So this measurement I mentioned earlier on is called throughput. Capacity is measured in throughput. Throughput, and I'd give you a link later on, and whether you can go read all about. I've written an extensive article on this with a lot of images, so you can read it and download it and stuff. But throughput is units per unit time. So if we're writing user stories, and I've always got post notes and Sharpies near me, if you're writing user stories, how many of these can we get done in a certain amount of time? Now, throughput in a lean sense assumes everything's the same size, which it isn't really. But let's be honest here. If you're estimating using, egg cartons or planning poker or t-shirt sizes, you're always within about three numbers: 3, 5, 8, 8, 13, 21. I don't know, whatever numbers you use, you're always within three sizes. Oh, sorry, you're using cycle time now because that's what Dan Bacanti, a guy I'm on a panel with in Budapest in a few weeks' time, told everybody to use instead of points. So let's try that, shall we? Let's try that for a bit of fun. Let's have a bit of fun here. Let's write down, okay, let's do some cycle times here. Cycle time's the wrong measure, by the way, but I won't worry about that. I'll worry about that in a minute. So I don't know how well you can see my screen. Let me stop sharing so you can see me bigger without at least the screen in the way. So let's just do some cycle times here. So we've got 5 hours and we've got 8 hours. Oh, so that's 13 hours. Where's the other one? 8 hours is there. So we've got 8 hours, 13 hours, 5 hours. So this is probably, a rough estimate of how we tend to do things in our small, medium, large sizes. Yeah. So let me just change that again for you. Let me just change something just quickly. And so we go and let's try this and see if this makes any difference. So now let's try this. Here's 5 points. Here's 8 points. Here's 13 points. Oh, what did we just do? Oh, I tell you what we did. We just changed the letters. You see what we did? We went from points to cycle time. And Ron Jeffries came up with the whole idea of points to avoid using time, because we suck at estimating in time, because that's what the Delphi method told us from back in the 1940s, the research. We suck at estimating, hence relative sizing. So actually all we did, we just wrote down some numbers. Now I use some Fibonacci numbers just for giggles. You don't have to use those, but that's what we did. We got 3 numbers. My 5 sucks, but 5, 8, and 13. So you can call it 5 bananas, 5 elephants. I don't know, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 hours. So you can use cycle time or any other relative size. But the point is that most work we do fits into one of a few buckets. We don't have 55 buckets. We have 3 or 4 buckets. If you've got 5 or more buckets, you need to get back into backlog refinement and learn how to do some backlog refinement work decomposition, some work breakdown, if you want to use the old terminology. So we're typically in these relative sizes that are very close to each other. Now, once you understand those relative sizes, you put the effort into that. Doesn't mean you don't have to use Monte Carlo. You don't have to use it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't use it either. It's perfectly valid. But once you know your capacity, now you can figure out how many, if I was to now say I've got some medium-sized things, how many medium-sized things can I do in a day, a week, a month? And how many small things could I do in a day, a week, and a month? And how many combination of medium and small things could I do in a day, a week, a month? That's called throughput. And throughput is governed by the efficiency of your process. So let's talk about, I did a thing for Shell Energy. So I made a slide for them, which I thought was fun and inspired by a friend of mine, Morten Elving. So in electricity transmission, when you see the big power lines overhead, the longer the power lines, the more loss of voltage is along those lines, and that causes, and there's actually a formula, I'll bore you with the formula in a minute, but you get lost depending on distance because of the resistance of the wires, the lines. That's why we have very high voltages on those power lines, so we can push current through the lines when the resistance is much higher because of the distance. So what tends to happen is you get a bunch of provided capacity in a project, an initiative, a set of teams in a PI, whatever you want to call it. And then you get a bunch of resistance called bad process. Yeah. So that's our variable resistance. This little symbol here means variable resistance if you're not an electronics person. And we end up with a reduced capacity or a usable capacity, which is less than the capacity we started with. We don't get, in that case, what is it, 12 people there. We don't get 12 people for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, because they're humans for a start. They're not machines. They need some time out. So maybe we got them for 60, say 80% of their available hours based upon all the other things that humans do during the day. But by the time we've got interfered with all this bad process outside of the work, the committees and the approvals and the permissions and the reviews and all that other nonsense that goes off, we actually end up with a lot less capacity than we thought we had to begin with. So if you can't measure your capacity and calculate what usable capacity you've got in some way, your plans are already wrong to begin with, because you're planning based upon 100% utilization, and we can't do that. And the other thing is then if you can't sort out that bad process, you end up doing this. You go and put RPA on it. And let me tell you, robotic process automation isn't AI. Okay, whatever they try and tell you, it's not what we call AI now. So if you just automate your process, Selenium, Python, it's just still a bad process, just a faster bad process. So you get more efficient at being crap. So these are the things, and this is what coaches need to be having conversations about, because this is how you help organizations improve. Now, the lean way of doing this is we balance the line. We balance the people doing the work, our resources, our capacity. We balance the capacity. Now, Kanban people, they should be obsessed with this, because this is sort of saying we've got too many developers, not enough testers. Let me use that as a simple example. So if you've got 10 people writing code and 1 person testing, you've created a bottleneck, you've created a constraint. And then if you get pressure to deliver, you're going to bypass the testing. You're going to start taking things that are SEV1, SEV2 defects, P1, P2 defects, making them P3, P4, SEV1, SEV3, SEV4. Because now you can't have enough time to test them and fix them. And 6 months later, you're paying the price in technical debt. So this all links to what's called process cycle efficiency. So let me just build this out a bit. Throughput, we've just gone through, items produced per unit of time. How many things can we do in a certain period of time? That's what throughput is in the lean definition, okay? So whether it's stories or bottles of soda or manufacturing iPhones or whatever. And yes, the work in the Agile world is variable. It's no, we're not making widgets, but I'll give you a slide on that shortly. But we can break those down to a small number of sizes of buckets. Then we can start to play around with our what ifs. If we need 5 small things, 10 big things, 15 medium things in the next 12 weeks or 10 weeks of your program increment to get this value shipped, you can then look at the capacity based upon historical data, which is all Monte Carlo is doing, and say, that ain't going to work. So what are you going to de-scope? Or what are you going to stop doing somewhere else so we can use that capacity to get the work done you want? That's units per unit time. Then we get into what's called process cycle efficiency. Now, I'm sorry to Mick Kirsten, this is what he calls flow efficiency, and Safe called flow efficiency, and it's wrong, wrong, wrong. You'll burn in hell for the bastardization of process cycle efficiency. And I can pull the book off my shelf. I don't recommend you buy it because it's really expensive and really big. It's real books, it's not a fake background. Factory Physics, about $150, $200. It's huge. It's well bookmarked. This is what defined process cycle efficiency for the last 70 years. So, and that is what Mick took to be flow efficiency. What process cycle efficiency does, it looks at all the work that's valuable and all the work that's not valuable and produces you a percentage. The problem with Mick's version of this, it only took weighting as non-value added work, and everything else he just assumed was value added, or the assumption is that the only thing that is wasteful is weighting. And that's the problem with flow efficiency. Process cycle efficiency looks at the whole thing. Now, I'm going to bore you with this. Yeah, why not, for a bit of fun? So let's think about this capacity thing. Working hours. So we think a total of all people in the team times 8 because we're machines. So that's the thing I told you. You never get that. That's fantasy. Even though that's how they're budgeted and charged, that's fantasy. So how big is it? So there's your relative point sizing I was doing with the post-it notes. Probability forecast. You've got the no estimates people who I'm told by some of my colleagues has died a death now anyway. It's not really a thing anymore. Because try and tell your bosses you're not going to give them any estimation, any prediction. Oh, it'll be done when it's done. So that's going to work. There is the people who want to size everything to more or less the same size. Good. That's awesome backlog refinement. So then you've only got small things, nothing but small things. And if you've only got small things, you can calculate how many things you can get done in a period of time real easy. Call it velocity, call it bananas, call it throughput, which is what it truly is. A friend of mine says velocity is trash. He really gets upset about the word velocity. So probability forecast, which is your Monte Carlo simulations. Number of user stories because they're all identical. Well, we know there's some variability. We just had that conversation. So look, if you now look points and time, all they did, and people I know that know this, that's all they did. It was cycle time is just an alternative to using points. So you can feed your points into a Monte Carlo simulation just the same as you can feed time into a Monte Carlo simulation. Monte Carlo doesn't care. So it's just a size. So how big is something? So this is back to this capacity. You've got to know how big something is and how many of those things you can do in a given amount of time, because that's your throughput, your capacity. Now, let's jump into something else and then I'll stop. Waiting and delays. So we've got this thing called workers imagined versus workers done. I get genuinely requests from all over the world to send them this graphic. This is on the walls in Jaguar Land Rover. It's on the walls in the National Health Service, the health service in the United Kingdom, because people write and ask me for this. Because this is what your bosses think it looks like the top line. The rest of us know it looks like this miserable mess at the bottom. But it's our job as coaches to make that miserable mess get better by identifying where the non-value added work is, where the waste is, and eliminating it or working it through continuous improvement activity, Kaizen activity, to eliminate it. And there's this other problem called Parkinson's law. You can go look it up. It's a thing on the internet. The guy from the 50s and 60s. Work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion, generalized as the demand upon a resource tends to expand to match the supply of the resource. So you will consume until you cannot consume anymore. This is the problem with a push system. They just keep shoving more and more and demanding versus a pull system, which is self-regulating. It will stop because you can't push work. We can only pull work when we have capacity. Now I'll give you a little bit more, then we'll stop and have a chat about some of this because I'm unloading a lot of stuff on you. I'm known for fire hosing people. So manufacturing is much easier to do it in because it's high visibility, low variation. You can walk in the plant, the factory, you can see it with your eyes. And it's low variation because we're making lots of the same thing. We're not making a bazillion, and we have mixed model production, but predominantly we're making lots of the same thing with very low variation. Whereas we get into software, it's low visibility, high variation. We can't see it because it's in a box, it's in an editor, it's in a computer, it's in the cloud. And most of us don't understand what it is anyway. That's another problem with coaching, is a lot of coaches have never done the job they're now coaching. So if you've never written code, you've never tested code, you've never worked in a team as a developer or as a scrum master, it's very difficult to coach that effectively because you don't understand it. It's like trying to coach football if you don't understand the game. I'm talking about the one with the round ball now, by the way. So the key difference between, there's a bit of a summary there for you. So here's a very simple tool that comes out of years ago. One of my Scrum Masters, she came up with this a long time ago working at Bose, the noise cancelling headphones people. It's called a pie chart. It's revolutionary, I know, and it's used, and we do it in Excel. So a Scrum Master and Agile coach every week or every sprint or every iteration, or even for a Kanban team, every period of time, whatever you define, because even with Kanban, even though it's continuous flow, you should stop and check your progress and retrospect occasionally. So what she would do is she'd work out what percentage of the work was new stuff. What percentage of the work was based upon continuous improvement, things we were trying to fix. What about noise? She called it buffer. This was interruptions. People coming and saying, have you got a minute? Can you do this? And then tech support, because guess what? A lot of these teams are on the hook for tech support. Now, whether you slice it via points or you slice it via percentages or whatever, it doesn't really matter. You just need to slice it, make work visible. So you've got continuous improvement work, net new stuff, the stuff that's been shoved at you, keep the lights on, run the business, defects, tech debt. They are different. One leads to the other, but one needs fixing. The other is a pain in the ass that slows you down gradually. And interruptions, all those management demands and urgent, the expedite lane on the Kanban boards. That's evil, by the way. Delete the expedite column. There's no such thing as expedite in Kanban, unless the business is collapsing and on fire. But this is making work visible. Let me give you another thing if you're network savvy people. Latency.
Hey, hang on, Nigel.
Sorry. Let me just stop there and go back one, and I'll be quiet.
It's a good point to pause. Logan's got a question of clarification just to make sure he's tracking, or they're tracking you, rather. If you can see the chat, if you can't see the chat, let me know. I'll read it.
No, I can.
Yeah.
Sorry. Good. Thanks for telling me. Seems like some of this talk is in response to an existing practice, possibly part of SAFe. No. I am an SPC, but I hate SAFe and I'd never use it. So I'll just be really clear with you there. I don't hate the things in SAFe. I hate SAFe as a concept. So you can't estimate cycle time ahead of time. So that's the difference between takt time and cycle time. Takt time, and I'll put it in the chat for you. I'll break this down as I go and see if I can get to the full answer. Equals demand time. So think of that as a metronome. That's and I may even have a slide on this somewhere, but think of that as a metronome. Here we go. Let's see if I've got it on here. Yeah, there we go. So at the bottom of the slide, it describes takt time. So you can't use cycle time as something you can't estimate cycle time ahead of time. Cycle time is what you're actually producing, what you're doing. That's the actual time. Takt time is the time you need to achieve to meet the customer demand. Let me break this down nice and simply. Let's say you need to do 100 user stories, product backlog items, whatever you call them, in 3 months. Let's just call it 3 months. We need to do 100 of these in 3 months. You can then look at, and let's assume they're all roughly the same size, just for sake of this academic discussion. You can now say, in that given amount of time, you could work out the working hours, the capacity of the team, and you can say, we need to do so many user stories every X units of time. That's tack time. That's calculating your demand. So I need to produce 1,000 of these Sharpies in a day. So I can now figure out in a shift, in a day, in 8 hours, if I need 1,000 of them, I'll do the math for you quickly. So if I was going to divide 1,000 divided by 8 hours, I need to be doing 125 an hour to meet the demand, to meet the order. That's tack time. So you can assess that up front. Cycle time is what it's actually taking you to complete. So this is why good refinement and understanding your sizing of items is important. Because if you don't get that right, and you've got 20 different sizes, you'll never figure it out. This takes an hour, this takes a day, this takes a week, this takes 12 hours, this takes 22 hours. You're all over the map. And if you've got that in your environment, in your world, your backlog refinement sucks. And that's the only way to fix that, is to decompose the work. Use story mapping, Jeff Patton's technique, other types of techniques to break down and slice the work. Let me read a bit more of this. Rather than something you would measure after the fact when something has been delivered. So cycle time is measuring after the fact. Tack time is measuring before the fact. Cycle time is a lagging metric, not a leading metric. It's a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator. It's telling you what you achieved, not what you can achieve. So now, if your historical data, your throughput data is consistent, you can then use that to predict forward. And that's what Monte Carlo is doing. I won't get into the vagaries of how it works with all the statistical probability and different statistical models it can use, sampling models, but it's effectively taking historical data, running lots of what-if scenarios, throwing in some randomization in there, and giving you a probability based on your historical performance. So whether that's points or time or some other measurement, that's all it's actually doing. So, I'm just reading what else he said here. I mean, further sarcasm. Okay. That's all right. I'm just reading the rest of the thing. So let me just ask Logan, come off mic if you want to. Just tell me, am I answering the question? Am I missing something?
Well, I'm maybe, I guess you did this thing with stickies and cycle time,
Yes.
which I think from what you've said now, I've put together that the process that exists in the world that you're arguing against is someone is taking cycle times and feeding it into a Monte Carlo simulation, and that's what you were poo-pooing. Did I get that right?
So what I'm saying is it's no different than feeding points into the Monte Carlo simulation.
Okay.
That, no pun intended, but that was my point. Is that
Okay.
and I'm gonna I'm a lean purist, so just cards on the table here. It's not cycle time; it's lead time. Because cycle time is the time taken to produce 1 unit of an order. So if I'm ordering 1,000 of these, to produce all 1,000 is the lead time. To produce 1 unit is the cycle time. Now, are all your user stories exactly the same? I assume every user story or every backlog item produces something complete, meeting the definition of done. Ho, 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 in safe teams, it very rarely does, but let's call it the definition of done, okay? Because you've got a definition of done which you all align to and you all comply with, I know, and part of that is your quality metrics, and I'm just taking the piss now. I'm sorry, I'm being sarcastic beyond belief. But
I actually haven't done safe, and I'm trying to figure out like which parts are you comparing, like you're comparing your ideal state to safe, and that part I can just discard and not care about.
Okay, do that.
So when you're so that's me. I don't know how many other people
we write a user story. Okay, so here's just something, a little card I put: course outline key topics. So I'm doing some courseware, so that would be a user story. Now, if I pick up another user story, which might say, well, the one I wrote earlier today, and these are my real scribbles, but I wrote one that said, create a slide on whip limits equals push. So these are 2 pieces of work. they're completely different. Now, if I have a definition of done, which allows me to know that this is done, it's met all my quality criteria, my performance criteria, and any user acceptance tests, or unless you're doing test-driven development or user acceptance test-driven development, then that, or acceptance test-driven development, I've met all the things that we define in the definition of done, and I've met any sort of individual criteria for this when I was doing the work. So it's done. We can call it complete. We're happy to ship this product. And that's how software is supposed to work in this whole agile Scrum world, is that you do a piece of work and it goes in the done column and it's potentially shippable because it meets all the criteria we've all agreed beforehand. So that's complete. We've completed this customer order. And this is another customer order for something different. That's lead time, not cycle time. It's a lean purist view of the world, yeah? Now, people could argue, well, I want all these user stories together to make a release. But then it's still lead time, but we've got product lead time and we've got customer lead time. The lead time of the product is finished. Now to deliver it to the customer, which is your release management processes, is the customer lead time. And that's on that slide that's on the screen at the moment. So that's the lean purist view. But, you know, the Kanban world decided to call everything cycle time, and I argued with them about that. And they told me, well, we just define it ourselves. And I said, no, you can't do that because you've got books like this, and you've got that company called Toyota that invented all this stuff. So you can't just go reinvent. It's like calling a banana an orange just because you want to call it an orange. It doesn't make it an orange. It's still a banana. But, you know, so this is what happens. You get me late at night. I'm all sort of, you know, a bit leery. Any other questions at this point? Or I delve into a little, what time is it? Oh, we're lost track of all time here. Oh, yeah, we've got a bit of time. So any other thoughts and questions before I go back?
I have a burning question.
Yes, Alina.
So, like the chemical engineer in me, listening to all of this, I'm thinking like, this is wonderful. You know, the throughput, the capacity, the cycle time. If everything would be also be so known in our own world. And then the coach in me that is aware of the complexity that always hits us in the face is thinking, where are the metrics and whose responsibility to measure them about how we learn and how quickly we adapt? So we don't produce crap over and over again, but efficiently, as you said.
No. And look, I mean, you talk about chemical engineering, which I know nothing about, by the way. So anything I say now, just take with a pinch of salt, because I'm a complete idiot when it comes to anything to do with chemistry and science of that nature. But it's about context. If you're doing a lot of hypothetical stuff, you're doing a lot of experimentate, which is where Scrum came out of, experimentation. So Scrum talks about empiricism all the time, and empiricism is only one part of science. That's inductive reasoning. You know, it's forming hypotheses based on observations alone. I mean, you're a chemical engineer, Alina, you'll know more about this than me. But there's this thing called deductive reasoning. There's actually something called abductive reasoning, which is the logic of the hunches, the gut feel, the guess. Deductive reasoning is taking known facts or data and then forming a hypothesis from that and running an experiment. So most software development, if you can make a plan, a sprint plan, the work's not complex. It might be hard, might be complicated. There might be some emergent learning in there, some things you didn't think about, but it's not truly complex. And I'm talking in terms of Cynefin, the Cynefin framework. Dave Snowden's a very close friend of mine. He's put a lot of effort into some of the work we've published and what have you. So the reality of it is the work isn't truly complex, and most Scrum isn't empirical, because most Scrum is planned work based upon known facts or data. It's not just making an observation and coming up with a hypothesis to be tested and then deciding what to do next, which is what the modern scientific method is. Francis Bacon, 1620, on the back of Galileo's work. Bacon was British, empiricism comes from him, and you're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, there's also David Blunt and Testing Business Ideas that he is working with mostly startups who are, trying to prove the concept of viability of the business. So it's a testing of business ideas. The same.
So you don't do any of this stuff. Any of this stuff I'm talking about is not applicable in a startup business, which you're actually, they used to, you're demoing for your job, as they used to call it. So every sprint review, which should be weekly in a startup, it should be the weekly sprints at most. If you're using sprints or iterations, you should be doing your sprint reviews and your expositions and what have you, and you're getting your feedback every week, because you're doing that to ensure the VC is going to give you the next check. I mean, you guys are in the valley. That's how it works. You demo for your job. You don't know whether you're still in business 6 months from now. You don't know if you've got a product to anybody. Eric Ries, lean startup and all that type of stuff. Yeah.
Right.
So the point being on that, you're not going to get into all this sort of measurements and metrics. Guess what you're going to be measuring is, how much money have we spent? How much money have we got left to spend? Does anybody really like our thing? How are we testing our thing? How are we getting empirical feedback, or are we getting any feedback, reactive feedback from our customers? How are we measuring that? How do we know that we should spend another sprint on this or go a different? I mean, really, you're doing spikes every sprint. That's what your sprints are. And that's really where Scrum works really well, because you define a hypothesis, you go and run an experiment, you look at what the results are, you then decide what to do next. In lean terms, PDCA, plan, do, check, act. If you prefer Deming's thing, plan, do, study, act. The thing is this, that's what you're doing. You're running very rapid iterations. And Deming wrote about this with Stewart in the 1950s. This isn't new news. So, but that's the context. But if you're working for a company that employs 1,000 people, 5,000, 50,000 people, you need this type of stuff, because you're no longer in a startup. You're in this gigantic political ecosystem. You're in a complex adaptive system where things are changing dynamically all the time. You've got egos, you've got status, you've got incentives, corporate incentives, the killer of all performance. So you've got all these things that are going off in this complex system that you now have to find a way to measure so that you can improve the system. As coaches, your job is to improve the system. Unless you're writing code. If you're writing code, now you're a developer. You're not a coach anymore. You're a developer. Go write code, go develop, or go vibe, or whatever the hell they call it now. Chop, that's the one where you talk to the computer. Or is it chap or chop? I forget. Simon Wardley was writing about it the other day. It made me laugh. But so these are the sort of things you need to worry. Let me just give you this, look. And then I'll stop talking and let Alex shut me down, and we'll do whatever else he wants to go. So there's a couple of things. I'll show you couple of slides, 3 slides in total. So when we look at, if you're a networking person, and if you don't know anything about networking, I question why you're in IT, but let's say we know a little bit of basic stuff about networking. Bandwidth, that's how fat the pipe is. Do you have a 0.5 gig pipe or 1 gig pipe? How much bandwidth you're getting from your provider. Throughput, how much stuff you can get through, how much data you can get through in the unit of time, megabits a second, that type of thing. And latency is how long it takes from hitting the button. You do your speed test and it tells you your latency. How long does it take from when you send a request to get a response? That's latency. So I've put on the right-hand side at the top, capacity is the bandwidth, time is how we measure delays, interruptions, dependencies, and units per unit time. Throughput, it's the same thing, look. So if we increase our capacity by putting a huge amount more people in the system, more people, more teams, we get an increase in throughput, but a huge amount of cost. Whereas if we can decrease the latency, the Japanese word for waste, muda, we get an increase in throughput for much less dollars. And I've made it really simple for you. Okay? So, if you got a big pile of shit and you scale it, or if you got a small pile of poo and you scale it, what do you end up with? A big pile of poo. This worked very well with the Japanese. So, And the last slide before I shut up, there's a difference between measures and metrics. And you need to understand the nuances here. A measure, and Alina will know this with her chemical engineering background, measures are base units. They're not divisible using a formula. They don't use a formula. Whereas a metric is derived using a formula. Metrics are data, measures are facts. Oh no, Toyota big guy Taichi Ono used to say, I like data, but I prefer facts. Because facts are irreducible. They are what they are. They just are. Whereas data is synthesized, it's massaged. All these PowerPoint presentations you sit in front of when the status is green until it's red, you know. And there's some words down the bottom that talk about that. Let me stop now because I've been ranting for a while. Thoughts, ideas. Alex, this isn't the world you want to work in, thankfully.
I'm allergic to companies that are perhaps large enough to require that, but I really want to hear from some of our other participants. I've spoken up enough tonight. Come on, challenge Nigel. He spouts a lot of stuff. He did a lot of talking. Come on, challenge him. Tell him he's wrong. Ask a question. Oh, no one's feeling bold.
They're all in shock, man. That's the problem.
they're chewing. They got a mouth full. They're chewing on all this
right. Let me just pause the recording for now. All right.
No, I'm in the car is what the problem is.
Go ahead.